Returning to the day I participated in Su Haoxian's selection for a consort, I let his true love replace my embroidery. Later, due to improper conduct in the palace, I was sent to a monastery for reflection. On the day I left the palace, Su Haoxian hurried over. He was angry at my lack of fighting spirit, furious over my stupidity. In my previous life, he had also been so hoarse with fury that he sought to depose me. I smiled calmly, "Your Highness, we've only met once. Why are you so stern with me?" He was instantly at a loss for words and deflated, having forgotten that we were not yet married at this time. And I had no desire to repeat the events of our past life. Ding! Royal Story reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. When I found myself sitting in front of the embroidery fabric again, I nearly burst into laughter. Xiao Wanhe was still sneaking glances at me, perhaps anxious about why I was so slow to start stitching. So, I granted her wish and embroidered the most intricate peony flowers for her. 2 hours passed, and the palace attendants came to collect the embroidery pieces. The daughters of officials participating in the selection were sent to wait on the side. A quarter of an hour later, Consort Fu, Su Haoxian's birth mother, slowly took her seat. Coincidentally, the first piece she looked at was mine. To be exact, it was the one Xiao Wanhe had bribed the palace attendants to switch with mine. She wasn't skilled in embroidery but wanted to be chosen. From the day she entered the palace, she observed that I was the best at embroidery among the candidates, so she plotted to exchange her piece for mine. In my previous life, of course, I didn't let her get away with it. I had already embroidered my name in the piece. When Consort Fu discovered it, the palace attendants had no choice but to say it was a careless mix-up. Hence, Xiao Wanhe was not selected. To avoid marrying someone else, she remained in the monastery, practicing with hair. Later, when Su Haoxian took power, disregarding the objections of the Empress Dowager and the officials, he brought her back to the palace. Afterward, he sought to depose the Empress and restore her position. As for me, I only received one sentence of regret from Su Haoxian many years after my death. It was a youthful mistake. "Did you embroider these mandarin ducks?" Consort Fu's question pulled me out of my daze. I lifted my head to see the palace attendant unfolding the embroidery. It was fairly decent, but amongst the works of other noblewomen, it was the least striking. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Xiao Wanhe's anxious gaze and smiled as I nodded. "Your Highness, I didn't embroider mandarin ducks, these are a pair of cranes." I had indeed told Xiao Wanhe that I planned to embroider a pair of cranes. Since it was wrong, it should be even more wrong for the better. As soon as I finished speaking, the other girls who participated in the selection began to chuckle quietly. Consort Fu's face did not look pleasant, but she said nothing more. When it was Xiao Wanhe's turn, she thought she had it in the bag. Little did she know that when she responded, Consort Fu's face turned utterly dark. Only then did she realize that I had embroidered peonies instead of cranes. Peonies would have been fine, but Consort Fu had a particular aversion to them. When she first entered the palace, the nanny told us that when Consort Fu was favored, she once tried to serve the emperor while wearing a peony-patterned dress during a time of his great anger. He reprimanded her, saying that as a consort, she was unworthy of using the peony's imperial symbolism. He made her kneel all night as punishment. Afterward, there were no peony motifs in Consort Fu's palace. Embroidering peonies was undoubtedly bringing up her old embarrassment in public. Xiao Wanhe hurriedly knelt, panicked and speechless. If she confessed, she would offend Consort Fu. If she didn't, she would have to admit to bribing the palace attendants to cheat. Indeed, there was no way out. The quiet laughter around me instantly turned to silence, no one dared to laugh or make a sound. Just then, I laughed out loud. In the silent palace, you could hear a pin drop. I smiled, naturally drawing everyone's attention. Consort Fu was furious and slammed the table, asking me, "Your skills are lacking, why are you laughing here now?" I pretended to be flustered and hurriedly knelt down. "Your Highness, please calm down, I just couldn't hold back." This only made her laugh in anger. "This is the good daughter that Minister Wei has raised? Fine, since you are so impulsive, I don't think the palace suits you. It would be better for you to cultivate your temperament in a temple." Guards, this girl has lost her manners before the court, immediately expel her from the palace and send her to Jing'an Temple to meditate. As soon as Consort Fu spoke, the palace servants hurriedly stepped forward to drag me away. At this moment, I really felt like laughing. In my past life after marrying Su Haoxian, I naturally suffered a lot from Consort Fu's harassment. I am very clear about her temper. Being sent to the temple meant avoiding marriage, and then finding an opportunity to fake death would free me from the prison of the capital completely. While packing, Nanny Chi came to nag me again. I don't think you're someone who can't hold back your temper. Why did you provoke Consort Fu today? Nanny, you misjudged me. I've always been straightforward, laughing when I want to laugh. I smiled and slipped her some silver. Thank you for taking care of me these days. In my past life after entering the palace, she was also the one who served me. We wouldn't see each other again from now on, so this farewell felt complete. Once you go to the temple, it will be hard to get married in the future, Nanny Chi sighed. Then I won't marry, I replied indifferently, haphazardly stuffing things before me. In my past life, I was chosen as a prince's consort and married Su Haoxian, but life wasn't particularly good. Consort Fu was furious and wanted to expel me from the palace that very day. The palace servants, not wanting to be implicated, hurriedly dragged and pushed me towards the palace gate. As I was about to walk out of the gate, a familiar voice called out from behind. Wait! I paused and turned around to see Su Haoxian rushing towards me. I rarely saw him this flustered. Including the last life when he deposed the empress, this was the second time. I stood still, waiting for the palace servants to salute and call out Ninth Prince before I slowly bowed and said, Greetings to the Ninth Prince. Everyone leave. You, come with me. The first part was directed at the palace servants, the second part was for me. Before I could respond, he grabbed my hand and pulled me towards the side of the palace gate with an unyielding force. In my past life, I hadn't met Su Haoxian by this time. Perhaps he thought I was mocking Consort Fu and wanted to scold me. Looking back at the open palace gate, I convinced myself. Why did you allow someone else to replace your embroidery? You know my mother doesn't like peonies, yet you still embroidered peonies? Can't you even hold back a laugh? Do you know what being sent to the temple means? Turning cranes into mandarin ducks. When did your embroidery skills degrade to this? I forgot how long Su Haoxian scolded me by the palace gate, only remembering that my feet felt a bit sore from standing. He was probably angry at my lack of effort, leading to the current irreparable situation. It was as if we had agreed to still marry each other even after rebirth. Under the shocked gaze of the palace servants not far away, I pried each of his fingers off my wrist. I looked up into his red eyes and smiled calmly. We have only met once, Your Highness. Why are you reprimanding me like this? I have never been good at needlework. What's so surprising about that? But you seem to know me quite well. With those light words, Su Haoxian deflated, his hand stiffly hanging in the air, not moving forward. He forgot that at this time, we were not yet husband and wife. He is his ninth prince, and I am my Wei Qianyu. If Your Highness has nothing else to say, I will take my leave. Consort Fu ordered it. I must go to Jing'an Temple today and dare not delay. From that moment onwards, once I stepped out of the palace gate, I would never return. The news that I had offended Consort Fu by losing my composure at the palace and was sent to Jing'an Temple to fend for myself quickly spread throughout the capital. My father was ashamed of me and refused to see me. The only person who came to visit me was my mother. But she did not come to console me, she came empty-handed. The only servant, Qiuyue, was the one who voluntarily came along. I asked a palace nanny about it. She said you embroidered a pair of mandarin ducks instead of the crane you were supposed to. I took a peek at the embroidery, and it was nowhere near your usual standard. Qianyu, tell me the truth, did you do it on purpose? Father might think I was useless, but my mother knew my character well. My needlework skills were taught personally by her. Mother already knows, so why ask? I bowed my head and continued to embroider a pouch, avoiding her scrutinizing gaze. The half-finished pouch was snatched away and stomped on by her. Do you realize you've implicated the Wei family? How will your younger siblings live with this in the future? And what about your own prospects for marriage? I won't get married. The movement of her hand nearly landed a slap on my face, but I caught her hand before she could touch me. Mother calmed herself. If you don't marry, how will you sustain yourself? Qingzhou will soon be taking the imperial exams. He is counting on you to marry into royalty so you can support him and to help find a good match for Linshi. As always, she infused me with those beliefs. A woman should marry to support her family, to pave the way for her siblings. It was the same in my previous life. They came to me pleading to protect father's position and find jobs for my brothers. In each instance, I agreed. Even when Su Haoxian complained that I was too focused on my own family, I never revealed my grievances to my mother. But when the decree to dethrone me was issued, no one spoke out for me. Mother was preoccupied arranging my brother's marriage, father was busy sending my sister to the palace. It was as if my presence or absence made no difference. Does getting married solve everything? The concubines in father's back courtyard have never shown you any respect. I've endured them for years, isn't that for your sake? I smiled and shook my head. Mother, is it really for me, or is it that you don't want to give up the facade of being the wife of the minister? Sending me to be a princess consort was just a way to gain favor with father. You. She pointed at me, tongue-tied. It's getting late. Mother should head down the mountain before it gets dark. Otherwise, Qingzhou will be off fooling around again, and father will be furious if he finds out. Mother left, but Qiuyue stayed behind. Why did you follow me? Miss, you only have me now. Naturally, I must come, Qiuyue said, gripping my hand with a smile. A sour feeling rose in my nose. In my previous life, even after I was deposed, she never abandoned me. The days ahead with me won't be easy. Though I had enough money saved that father had given me for palace expenses, we could live off it if we left now. But leaving too quickly might arouse suspicion. Particularly since Su Haoxian was also reborn. Miss saved my life. No matter what kind of days lie ahead, I am willing to stay by your side. She kept shaking her head, terrified I would abandon her. She made me laugh, and I tapped her forehead lightly. You. Living in the temple meant simple food and drink, but we couldn't just live off our savings. I embroidered some pouches, handkerchiefs, and sachets daily for Qiuyue to sell in the town below. The first day, she returned after half a day, handing me a tael of silver. So much? The pouches were worth at most half a tael. Qiuyue nodded. As soon as I set up, a young man bought everything. He was very generous and said if there was more, I should sell it all to him. I frowned. He must have other intentions. Don't sell to him again. Thinking it over, I could only conclude it was Su Haoxian. That night, after Qiuyue had fallen asleep, someone sneaked into my room. Feeling the dagger in my hand, I sprang up to attack, only to see the person grabbing the blade with his bare hands, letting the blood flow freely. In the dim moonlight, I saw Su Haoxian's pale face. I loosened my grip. When did you, ninth prince, learn to be a thief? Su Haoxian remained silent and tossed back the pouch that Qiuyue had sold earlier today. The dagger fell to the ground, and the blood dripped onto the floor, making a loud noise in the quiet of the night. The embroidery is the same, but this pouch is worlds apart from the one in the palace. How long do you plan to keep this from me, my empress? The title empress was inappropriate at this moment. In a past life, I had already been deposed, now I was simply Wei Qianyu. The two of us stood facing each other, neither speaking. Back then, when he allowed Xiao Wanhe to return to the palace as a consort, we also stood deadlocked like this. From then on, Su Haoxian and I went from being husband and wife to being emperor and minister who doubted each other. I didn't know how much time had passed, but the smell of blood began to make me uneasy. Did you come here so late at night to reverse my unjust fate and marry me, a woman with a tainted reputation? Do you still want the throne, Your Highness? My conduct at court was indeed unbecoming, and now Su Haoxian was out of favor. Marrying a woman with a bad reputation would mean losing his chance at the throne. Su Haoxian was nearly obsessed with power. Otherwise, in our past life, he wouldn't have left Xiao Wanhe at the monastery for years and only brought her back to the palace after ascending the throne. Asking him to give up the throne was as difficult as climbing to the sky. Su Haoxian's lips moved, but no words came out. Tired of the standoff, I went back to sleep straight away. I didn't know how long he sat by my bed, but by the next morning, he was gone. The dagger had been cleaned and put away neatly, and the bloodstains from the night before seemed like just a dream. I cursed under my breath, but then I heard Shoiwa's startled voice from outside. I ran outside at the sound, only to see several wooden boxes that hadn't been there before. Miss, this must be old master and madam, feeling sorry for you and sending these things overnight. Shoiwa happily checked the contents of the boxes. There were fine silks and brocades, a fox fur cloak for winter, hand warmers, and expensive perfumes, all the things I used to use in the palace. One of the boxes was full of needle and thread. It was clear who had sent them. These things aren't something the Wei family could afford. Their origin is unclear, better not touch them to avoid trouble. I motioned for Shoiwa to put them back and throw them outside. The boxes were heavy, and Shoiwa and I had a hard time moving them. Do you need help, ma'am? The noise must have been too loud and attracted the attention of a guest staying at the neighboring courtyard. Turning around, I saw a familiar face. In our past life, at the height of mutual hatred between Su Haoxian and me, he wanted to depose me, and I wanted to seize power. So, I made connections with powerful ministers, and Gu Laikin was one of them. He came from a humble background and had once stayed at Jing'an Temple before passing the imperial exams. I never thought I'd run into him again in this life. I nodded at him. Thank you, sir. With Gu Laikin's help, the boxes were quickly thrown outside the temple. These boxes seemed to be intricately made, with gold-painted patterns on them. The contents are likely not ordinary. Why abandon them, ma'am? Gu Laikin asked. They're indeed not ordinary items, but I'm just an ordinary person, so they don't belong to me. Possessing things that don't belong to you brings trouble. Better to get rid of them quickly. Gu Laikin nodded at my words. You have a clear perspective, ma'am. I admire that. You're too kind, sir. It's all thanks to your help today. Would you stay for lunch as a token of my thanks? If you insist, then I will gladly accept your invitation. Gu Laikin and I exchanged smiles. The crab roe are especially delicious this time of year. I wonder if you like them, sir? I was asking knowingly. Gu Laikin, like Su Haoxian, enjoyed crab roe. Su Haoxian disliked the hassle of cracking the shells, so during meals, I would always crack them for him. Sometimes he found eating just crab roe boring, so I'd make a noodle dish with crab meat and crab roe for him. That's a fine dish, calling it a simple meal is quite modest. You don't know, my lady's crab roe noodles are a specialty. You're in for a treat today. The three of us turned around, talking and laughing, only to see Su Haoxian standing not far away. I went up the mountain this morning and am starving. How about a bowl of crab roe noodles for me too? He joined the conversation seamlessly, but his hand under his sleeve remained clenched tightly. When he walked closer, he slowly unclenched it, revealing the blood-stained bandage on his palm, just like his twisted emotions. There was a time when Su Haoxian and I genuinely treated each other sincerely, sharing hardships as a married couple. When I married him, Consort Fu had long since fallen out of favor, and he was not prominent among the numerous princes. His background did not compare to the second prince, who was born to the empress. Nor could he match the first prince, who had long since cultivated his own faction. Initially, my father thought it was useless for my mother to let me be a candidate for Su Haoxian's princess consort. Even if I were to become his principal wife, there wouldn't be much interaction with the royal manor. He was a prince neglected by the emperor, and I was a daughter my father didn't care about. Precisely because of this, we wanted more to carve a path through adversity. He needed to earn military merits, while I made connections with noble women in the capital, trying to discern the political landscape. The delayed supplies, the commanders of neighboring states who were unwilling to provide reinforcements, all had schemers behind them pulling the strings. Because of this, I had to navigate between the nobility in the capital either to gather information or to sow discord, coordinating with him who was far away at the frontier. Letters between home and the battlefield were frequent at that time. To avoid suspicion, we even wrote nonsense informal letters, filling them with lewd love talk or childish complaints. But the letters hidden among the common soldiers and family members were the ones that carried our true messages. He disguised himself as a soldier, while I posed as a military wife writing back to him. Though we discussed important matters, he still called me wife in his letters, occasionally asking if I had been troubled by anyone in the capital. I always said no, as I was long accustomed to cold faces and sarcasm since my time at the Wei estate. But those noble women and ladies who gave me a hard time often faced retribution, be it from mistresses indulged by their husbands or by being driven mad from fright. The most severe case was Madame Song from the household of Marquis Onping, who pushed me into the water. When I was recuperating, she was killed by robbers on her way to visit her relatives. I knew these weren't acts of divine justice or karma. If there really were gods, then at that time, Su Haoxian was my god. Later, when he returned to the capital with military merits, the emperor was delighted and began to entrust him with court affairs. Su Haoxian was always decisive and efficient in his actions, garnering dissatisfaction from the ministers. But they dared not voice their displeasure due to the emperor's favor. At that time, there were rumors in the capital saying he was the reincarnation of the king of hell, black-hearted and ruthless. But what did it matter? He treated me sincerely, granting me the respect I had never received before. Black-hearted? Perhaps that's just another form of sincerity. That's how I convinced myself at the time. After Su Haoxian's rise to prominence, the royal manor inevitably became a target for others. Assassination attempts came both in the open and in the shadows. Every time there was an attempt on his life, he shielded me behind him. But it was always clear that those people wanted him, not me. Once during an autumn hunt, the enemy led a pack of wolves towards us, and Su Haoxian was severely injured protecting me. We had to jump into a cave at the bottom of a cliff to seek refuge, waiting for rescue. His wound kept bleeding, so I tore my robe to bandage him, layer after layer stained red. We waited from dusk till midnight, yet no one came to save us. Given that it was an orchestrated plot, how could we be easily rescued? I watched the color drain bit by bit from Su Haoxian's face, calling out to him in vain, helplessly weeping on his shoulder. I rarely cried since childhood because crying never resulted in comfort from my mother or solace from my father. My mother said tears were the most useless thing, so she never allowed me to cry. I couldn't tell if I needed to vent or if I was truly too worried. I only remember Su Haoxian suddenly waking up and using his blood-stained hand to wipe my tears. The more he wiped, the dirtier my face became, leaving him at a loss. Knowing my preference for cleanliness and that I didn't like having dirt on my face, he made me laugh, and then he laughed as well. Stop crying. If we die here, at least we'll have shared the same bed in life and the same grave in death, achieving a kind of fulfillment. He comforted me while moonlight shone down, stars seeming to reflect in his eyes, making them sparkle. Who's sharing the same bed and grave with you? You clearly said that when you ascend the throne, you would make me empress. I retorted, not wanting him to fall back into unconsciousness. All right. If I make it back alive and ascend the throne, I'll personally place the phoenix crown on your head. Su Haoxian agreed lightly back then. Later, true to his word, he personally placed the phoenix crown on my head. But once at the pinnacle of power, he no longer seemed like the same person. I cannot say when things started to change between Su Haoxian and me. It could have been when various noble families began sending their daughters to the royal manor after he rose to prominence. Or perhaps it was when he became fixated on Xiao Wanhe and did everything to bring her back into the harem. It's hard to say, and I can't remember clearly. He said he needed to counter the influential ministers, and I believed him. He said it was all just an act, and I believed him again. Until he wanted to bring Xiao Wanhe into the palace. I initially thought Su Haoxian wouldn't believe the rumors outside that Xiao Wanhe was truly devoted to him and had kept her integrity to remain unwed. After all, he knew exactly what happened at the selection banquet for the prince consorts years ago. Yet, he told me that Xiao Wanhe's father begged him to take her into the palace to fulfill a long-held promise. He also said, "I don't want the people to think I'm a man who breaks his promises." I looked at the man consulting with me, feeling a chill in my bones. The Empress Dowager did not allow Xiao Wanhe into the palace, and the officials deemed it absurd as well. Su Haoxian consulting with me was no more than asking me to make the decision, convince the Empress Dowager, and silence those officials. But the reason he gave was not wanting people to think he breaks his promises, which was utterly laughable. Over the years, who in the military or the court hadn't witnessed his ruthless methods? Whether he cared about rumors or Xiao Wanhe was self-evident. He could have told me bluntly, but he chose to lie. I no longer wanted Su Haoxian's heart. I still didn't allow Xiao Wanhe to enter the palace. I had my own selfish reasons. Naively, I thought that having been with Su Haoxian for so many years, sharing life and death experiences, he would side with me. That was the first time he got angry with me, smashing a teacup that shattered on the ground. In all our years of marriage, even when I accidentally broke the birthday gift he had given Consort Fu, he would only laugh and stop me from picking up the pieces. At that time, Su Haoxian would console me, saying, "It's broken, so let it be. Don't pick up the pieces and hurt your hand." But that time, he let the teacup shatter at my feet and left without looking back. Xiao Wanhe still entered the palace, using the excuse of carrying the imperial heir. The Empress Dowager, concerned about heirs, no longer opposed it. The officials, knowing that Su Haoxian had no children, also stopped advising against it. However, just after returning to the palace, Xiao Wanhe experienced complications. It was said that the food delivered by the kitchen was incompatible, harming the fetus. Su Haoxian was furious and questioned me at the palace banquet about my carelessness. I knew there was more to his words. The concubines in the palace had no offspring because he didn't want external families to gain power before the political situation was stable. He instructed me, and I took care of it. I was very clear on how to leave no trace. I quietly watched as he publicly scolded me, my palms filled with cold sweat. I then realized that he could no longer tolerate me. He knew my past methods and wanted to use Xiao Wanhe's unborn child to get rid of me. It's often said that no one likes people who are too similar to themselves because when they look at each other, they see the same detestable person. At that moment, I fully understood this saying. I no longer loved him. I felt disgusted. We had gone from being a couple to being ruler and minister, from love to suspicion. But Su Haoxian miscalculated. The moment Xiao Wanhe entered the palace, I had already thought of ways to protect myself. As I had said, we were too similar. I had also sensed that one day we would loathe each other. One day, he would want to get rid of me because I knew too much. I never intended to harm Xiao Wanhe. On the contrary, I wanted Xiao Wanhe's child. I wanted to get rid of Xiao Wanhe. Raising a young emperor would be far better than daily guessing Su Haoxian's thoughts. That day, Xiao Wanhe's child survived, but I lost my own child. I pretended to trip and fall down the steps, killing his child in front of everyone. The matter ended abruptly. I watched as he pretended to call for the imperial doctor in panic. He once said that the political situation was unstable, and he didn't want our child to be born into a life of constant fear. I believed him. Now, I also didn't plan to let my child be born because, in this palace, his father could not tolerate him. I knew how painful it was for a child not to be expected by their father, and I knew this deep palace was a place that devoured people whole. I didn't want my child to become someone else's puppet in the future. Getting rid of this child was always in my plan. Su Haoxian just accelerated the process. Su Haoxian put on quite a show, sitting by my bedside all night. That whole night, I had my back to him, afraid I might burst out laughing. He comforted me, saying, "Empress, we will have more children." No, we wouldn't have any more children. After the miscarriage, Su Haoxian frequently visited my palace. Xiao Wanhe immediately lost favor. Even when she used her illness to summon him, he didn't go. I found him annoying and sent him to Xiao Wanhe's palace a few times. I was busy making connections with influential ministers and had no time for him. However, he started coming even more frequently. I simply drugged his meals and discreetly asked the imperial doctor whether Xiao Wanhe was carrying a boy or a girl. If it was a girl, I needed to find a suitable child outside the palace to replace her. But fate wasn't on my side. Su Haoxian still found out. He first discovered my abortifacient, then found out about the slow poison I was giving him. That day, he threw a hysterical fit in the hall, smashing everything to pieces. He wanted to depose me, to destroy what I cared about most. He said he would give the position of empress to Xiao Wanhe. I found him laughable. Wasn't that his plan all along? I was confined in the Fengqi Palace, and Su Haoxian came to see me daily. He told me no one pleaded for me, not the Wei family who had always supported me, nor the ministers I had once helped. He just looked down at me, expecting me to beg for mercy like a fearful abandoned dog. I only felt disgusted. Winners are kings, losers are bandits. I'd rather die than be a prisoner of war. So that night, I set the Fengqi Palace on fire, burning it to ashes. The words in that mountain cave came true. He indeed gave me the Empress's position and then personally destroyed it. And I indeed no longer wish to be his wife. In life, we would not share the same bed, and in death, the same grave. Drawing myself out from the memories, I lowered my eyes to avoid Su Haoxian's gaze. I do not know you, sir. Your advances are unwarranted. Just as I was about to move past him and leave, he grabbed my arm. Consort Fu has ordered you to leave the palace for self-cultivation and reflection. Yet here you are, meeting secretly with another man. Have you considered the consequences if this news reaches the palace? Su Haoxian's voice was not loud, but Gu Laikin could hear it clearly. Gu Laikin, who had navigated the officialdom with ease in a previous life, naturally heard the implications. I did not know your status, miss, and I apologize for disturbing your cultivation today. As expected, Gu Laikin cupped his hands and left upon hearing this. Watching his departing figure, Su Haoxian smiled and said, "He is the same as in the past life." Are you sure you want him to marry you? Not to mention that he is now just a poor scholar. Even if he wanted to marry you, my mother would not let you marry so easily. Indeed, I intended to use Gu Laikin, but not for marriage. Gossip and speculation would suffice. This way, whether it was Consort Fu or anyone else, they would never allow someone like me to marry into the royal family. I signaled for Qiuyue to leave first. The rest of the conversation I needed to have alone with Su Haoxian. If he dares not marry, does your highness dare? I retorted with a cold smile. Your highness is now just a neglected prince. You should worry about your own affairs first. Are you really so unwilling to marry me again? He asked. Does your highness really want to be harmed by me again? Don't you want to marry your Xiao Wan He? Past adversity turned us from loving couples into resentful ones. I truly did not want to repeat the same mistakes. After struggling my whole life, I ended up with nothing. It would be better to abandon my identity in the capital and live freely. I still don't understand why, in both our past and present lives, you are always so willful. Is it merely because I brought Xiao Wan He into the palace? I bent over with laughter until tears blurred the figure before me. Even now, he still thought I was throwing a tantrum. Instead of worrying about these things, your highness might want to pay attention to your cousin. In the past life, Fu Linfeng, Su Haoxian's cousin, used his name to open gambling dens and make money in the capital. This was not a big deal since powerful people in the capital liked to engage in business, as long as it wasn't exposed to the emperor. Unfortunately, in the past life, Fu Linfeng encountered the second prince's reform of the capital's customs, dragging Su Haoxian down with him. After our wedding, Su Haoxian was implicated because of this matter and could only restore his status by joining the army. I've already taken care of this matter, Su Haoxian responded. Don't be anxious, your highness. I was referring to your cousin encouraging Consort Fu to secretly lend money at usurious rates outside the palace. As soon as I finished speaking, my wrist was gripped tightly once again. Su Haoxian likely did not expect me to know about this. Or perhaps, he did not know I would intervene so early. In the past life, Consort Fu lent money at high rates to maintain her luxurious lifestyle within the palace. She hid it well, so well that even Su Haoxian did not discover it. Of course, I had helped cover it up for her. In this life, Su Haoxian had closed down Fu Linfeng's gambling dens early, cutting off his money source. In desperation, I had someone inform him that Consort Fu had always lent money secretly. With his lucrative income cut off and learning that his mother was also engaged in illegal activities, Fu Linfeng was naturally dissatisfied and demanded a share from Consort Fu. Now that Consort Fu had fallen out of favor, she naturally feared exposure and would agree to let Fu Linfeng join. In the past life, I managed Consort Fu's accounts. Your Highness's cousin is not as cautious as I am. If your Highness acts quickly, I believe the second prince has not yet uncovered your cousin's usurious activities. Su Haoxian suddenly smiled, his eyes devoid of any other emotions. So be it. He smiled at me with his hands behind his back, no longer advancing, nor did he show the urgency I had expected. When I looked back after walking far, Su Haoxian's figure had already disappeared. Su Haoxian watched Wei Qingyu's departing figure and inappropriately thought of a past life. In that past life, after she was deposed, every time Su Haoxian came to see her, she always faced away from him. Even on the day she self-immolated, she still refused to meet his eyes. He never understood why the two of them ended up in such a state just because of Xiao Wanhe. In the past, when he was just playing around, she had never reacted this way. Only with Xiao Wanhe did he have genuine intentions. When Su Haoxian was young, his mother was not favored and was often bullied by other princes and princesses. At that time, only Xiao Wanhe spoke up for him. Su Haoxian once considered marrying her, but at the selection banquet, he met Wei Qianyu. The family backgrounds of both were comparable, and in terms of handling affairs and intelligence, Wei Qianyu was clearly superior. It was obvious to everyone that the palace servants hadn't mistakenly swapped the embroidery, but had done it intentionally to preserve Xiao Wanhe's dignity, so no one spoke of it. Su Haoxian thought that he and Xiao Wanhe were destined to miss each other, but who knew she would enter a temple and cut off all retreat. He felt guilty towards her, but he was struggling to protect himself. So many years later, when he brought Xiao Wanhe into the palace, it was to make amends. But in making amends to her, he ultimately wronged Wei Qianyu. By the time Su Haoxian looked back, there was already an irreparable rift between him and Wei Qianyu. She no longer looked at him with unguarded smiles but learned to act with him like everyone else. He and she were too similar, and no matter how well she acted, he could see through her immediately. Her attention shifted to the court, and she spoke more with those officials than with him. Su Haoxian thought he could wait until her anger subsided, wait until her heart slowly drew closer again, just like when they were newly married. Until Su Haoxian discovered that Wei Qianyu's miscarriage was not an accident and she had poisoned him. She had personally killed their child yet could still calmly plot his death. Su Haoxian lost control and questioned her emotionally, but he could only repeat why over and over again. She looked at him coldly, listening quietly as he deposed her, clipped her wings, and imprisoned her in the palace. The day she self-immolated, by the time Su Haoxian rushed over, the palace hall was already engulfed in flames. Su Haoxian knew she liked to leave no room for reversal in her actions. The fire couldn't be extinguished, and he was isolated outside. Su Haoxian wanted to rush in but was stopped by Wei Qianyu's maid. My lady said that once she was deposed, she and the emperor were no longer husband and wife. You should separate and never meet again. Whether it's hell or reincarnation, my lady only wants to walk her path alone. Su Haoxian felt a crushing weight in his chest, which ultimately turned into a mouthful of blood splattering on the broken palace gates. As he closed his eyes, he heard her wedding blessings, "May we be like swallows on the beam, meeting year after year." Su Haoxian wanted to reach out and grab her, but no matter how hard he tried, she disappeared like smoke. He wanted to say that, apart from her, he didn't want anything else. But when he realized what he truly wanted, he had forever lost it. He didn't know how long he watched before coming back to reality. She had gone to complain to his second brother, deliberately causing trouble, clearly not intending to let him go. That was fine. Su Haoxian thought. Hatred was better than never seeing each other again. Since Su Haoxian's departure, I have not slept well for several days. The second prince has not successfully uncovered the evidence of consort Fu and Fu Linfeng's money-lending business, thanks to Su Haoxian's timely intervention. This was within my expectations. After all, Su Haoxian has been reborn once, and breaking through the situation is not difficult for him. Yet, the second prince already knows about consort Fu's money-lending business, he just struggles to find evidence. With this incident, the second prince will realize that Su Haoxian is not simple, and he will surely try to create obstacles in the future. But I still feel uneasy. The smile on Su Haoxian's face that day made me unable to fathom it. He did not feel angry or helpless about my interference in the background, rather he smiled with joy. Madman. The only plan now is to extricate myself as quickly as possible. Xiao Wanhe is Su Haoxian's true love. With her hand, Su Haoxian will not act out. More importantly, this person is not deeply scheming and is persistent in marrying Su Haoxian. I revealed the news that Su Haoxian frequently went up the mountain to see me to Xiao Wanhe. Earlier, Su Haoxian persuaded consort Fu to delay marriage, which clearly embarrassed Xiao Wanhe. Now, telling her that Su Haoxian always thinks of me, a woman expelled from the palace, will definitely infuriate Xiao Wanhe. As expected, the People's Xiaowan he sent arrived on time, while Qiuyue and I hid at the mountain top. After seeing them leave, we set fire to the courtyard, so everyone would think we perished. Taking this opportunity, we would hide our names and stay away from the capital. But from dawn until it was completely dark, Qiuyue and I did not see those people come down the mountain. When dawn approached, Qiuyue woke me up, still drowsy. Miss. Look, isn't that the man who spouted nonsense to you the other day? I fully awoke upon hearing this and, pressing my sore shoulders and neck, saw Su Haoxian, covered in blood, walking towards us. Upon closer inspection, I saw numerous knife wounds on his body, with blood dripping from his sword-holding hand, leaving a trail along the way. It was as if I had returned to my previous life, when he similarly, covered in blood, stood protectively in front of me and secretly wiped his bloody hands while comforting me. The figure before me overlapped with the one from my past life, his gaze towards me filled with the same tenderness and reluctance. It seemed nothing had changed, except me. At that moment, I seemed to understand Su Haoxian's words, so be it. Such entanglement, whether hate or love, was no longer important. For me, indeed it was not important, because in my heart, he had long ceased to be important. Su Haoxian rushed forward and hugged me tightly, almost suffocating me. He said, "I'm sorry, I understand what you want now." I hesitated before embracing his back, smiling as I responded, "All right." I truly felt like laughing at how self-righteous he still was. That day, before Su Haoxian reached the familiar courtyard, he heard the sound of rummaging inside. Listening carefully, there were the whispers of strangers and the clashing of blades. Su Haoxian clearly heard the number of intruders and the specific weapons they bore. With years of military experience in his past life, he naturally understood what this implied. At this time in the past life, Wei Qianyu had not yet offended anyone. Even if she had, it would not have warranted such deadly retribution. If this had happened, it must have been premeditated. Without much thought, Su Haoxian rushed inside. He had no weapon, only the almond cake he had just taken from the palace, which she used to love. Dropping the almond cake from above, he distracted the assassins and, taking advantage of the distraction, seized the knife from the nearest assassin. The scene was chaotic, but she was nowhere to be found. The assassins were ordered to kill Wei Qianyu, unaware of the intruder's identity, yet knowing they could not leave any witnesses. The assassins attacked en masse, but Su Haoxian, alone against many, did not struggle. The mastermind had assumed it was just two defenseless women, so the hired killers were mostly second-rate wandering rogues, easy to deal with. Wei Qianyu had anticipated this day, likely observing everything from a hidden place. Su Haoxian looked up the mountain and finally fixed his gaze on the platform at the top, a place with a clear view of the main path up the mountain. If it were up to him, he would definitely choose that spot. The journey, neither long nor short, felt slow and lonely. He recalled the days after Wei Qianyu left in his past life. He often dreamt of their wedding. She would raise a cup and smile brightly at him, "May we be like the swallows on the rafters, meeting year after year." In her phoenix eyes, his reflection was as if seen in a mirror. Then, he too would raise his cup, and they would drink together. They were alike, both struggling in the mire, both yearning for the high places. People seldom fall in love with those two much like themselves. Looking at each other is like looking in a mirror, only feeling bored. Yet, Su Haoxian hadn't thought so then. But he and Wei Qianyu were not like that. They were a couple who had weathered hardships together, once sharing life and death. But the high places are cold, and in the end, the wind scattered them. During her deposition, Su Haoxian did not publicly disclose Wei Qianyu's crimes. To outsiders, she had no faults and was unjustly deposed. He was heartless and ungrateful. After confining her to the palace, he visited her daily, hoping she would turn around and ask him to stay. But she never did, leaving him only to see her in his dreams, which kept him sleepless at night. He never installed another empress, drowning himself in state affairs. The Fengqi Palace was rebuilt, yet he never had the courage to step inside. He feared her spirit remained there, and that in the dead of night, he would see her turning her back on him, just as she had in life. Hate him or blame him, it doesn't matter. But one thing is certain, she doesn't not want to see him again in this lifetime. She severed all ties to rid herself of him, even if it meant risking her life. Sometimes Su Haoxian wished he didn't understand her so well, but they were so similar that they couldn't hide their thoughts from each other. If only they could go back to the beginning. In the beginning, they only had each other. Su Haoxian looked down at the knife in his hand and thought of the time when she cried on his shoulder. She was always good at hiding her emotions, whether sad or angry, she always used a smile to cover it up. That time, however, she showed her most vulnerable side to him. Even when Wei Qinyu was defeated, Su Haoxian never saw her cry again. When Su Haoxian saw Wei Qinyu, his clothes were already soaked with blood, assassin's blood, and his own, so mixed they were indistinguishable. He hurried forward and held her tight, wishing he could fuse her into his own flesh and blood. This time, she did not avoid him. But she didn't let him hold her for long. "Your Highness, you've stained my clothes." She didn't respond to his words, frowning in disdain at the bloodstains on her dress caused by him. "Sorry, I'll send some new ones over tomorrow." Su Haoxian forgot that she always cared about cleanliness. "This place isn't safe, you should return to the Wei residence. The assassins were killed by you, Your Highness. They probably won't send anyone else. Qiuyue and I still need to go down the mountain to report to the authorities. If you don't want to get involved, you should leave to heal quickly." She remained aloof, but Su Haoxian heard an opportunity in her words. She spoke of reporting to the authorities, not leaving. "Qinyu, I." Su Haoxian looked at her, his heart aching from her cold gaze. "Your Highness will soon head to the border with the army. Are you certain you don't need to heal or care about the throne?" She reminded him, her tone softening a bit. "I don't want it anymore." He didn't want anything, only her. "In our past life after you left, I often thought of the days when you first entered the royal residence. At that time, it was just us, though we saw each other rarely. Those were the days you loved me the most. Your Highness has a good memory. When I return victorious this time, I will ask Father for our marriage and request to be stationed away. From now on, I don't want anything else." As he finished speaking, he met her surprised eyes, faintly moved. "Wait for me, will you? This time I won't help you. Whether your Highness can return alive is uncertain." I poured cold water on Su Haoxian. But he laughed, as sincerely as he had a few days ago. Su Haoxian asked me to wait for him. I didn't agree, nor did I refuse outright. That day, even though I didn't help him bandage his wounds, I did find clean clothes and gauze for him. I knew exactly what that meant. I didn't see him off when he left the mountain. I had Qiuyue watch him go off and then come back to report to me. Qiuyue said he was very happy. "Miss, do you really plan to stay in the temple? Why not go back and ask Master and Madam to plea with Consort Fu in the palace? What if those assassins come back? Those people won't come again. None of the assassins survived. Xiao Wanhe will surely be scared. She won't act rashly again until she figures out my situation. It was the same in our past life. After my miscarriage, she only focused on her own pregnancy and did not come to harm me again. Does Miss really want to marry the 9th prince? He doesn't seem like a kind person. Getting close to you may have other motives." Qiuyue was straightforward, and she spoke the truth. "Of course not. I wouldn't gamble on what Su Haoxian said that day. Being fooled in the same way twice would just be foolish. No one can say for sure what the future holds. I originally thought I could use Xiao Wanhe's hands to fake my death and escape, but Su Haoxian discovered it and killed everyone, ending up badly wounded. His purpose was to gain my forgiveness. I began to understand what he meant when he said, 'So be it,' that day. Such a death struggle was fine for him. But not for me. He said he would renounce everything from our past life and marry me, yet he never asked if I was willing. He brought Xiao Wanhe into the palace in our past life, and now in this life, he says he wants to marry me. I involved Fu Linfeng in Consort Fu's usury scandal just to make Su Haoxian retreat in the face of difficulties, but instead, he got more determined. So, I can only play this game with him. Qiuyue and I went to the authorities to report the case, pretending to be confused, answering everything vaguely. When the news reached the Wei family, my father and mother thought I had offended people in the palace and began to avoid me. On the day Su Haoxian led the army out, I lit an eternal life lamp in the temple. On the lamp, I wrote the day our child left in the past life, omitting the year to avoid suspicion. The abbot was surprised as he placed the lamp. Another benefactor once offered an eternal life lamp with the exact same wording as Miss Way's. He reached out and pointed it out to me. Indeed, the other lamp had the same date written on it. I recognized it. It was Su Haoxian's handwriting. Perhaps he had also looked forward to the child's arrival, or maybe it was part of his ploy. Maybe it's a coincidence. Place my lamp further away to avoid confusion for the other benefactor. The abbot nodded and placed the eternal life lamp on the other side. Miss, why did you offer the eternal life lamp out of nowhere? I haven't heard of you losing any close relatives recently, Qiuyue asked me. It's just a way to bid farewell to my past self. From today on, everything from my previous life has nothing to do with me. Did you finish what I asked you to do? After all, I once attended the banquet for the selection of the princess consort, and certain matters are more appropriate for Qiuyue to handle. Everything is done, miss, don't worry. Though Qiuyue has a straightforward nature, she's loyal to me. Whatever task I assign, even if she doesn't understand it, she will complete it for me. Did you find out about the merchant caravan going to the western region? Of course, the caravan leaving early next month will pass through the South City. Do you want to go to the South City? I mockingly asked while looking at the map. Miss, no need to ask the obvious. Before being sold to the capital, I lived with my mother in the South City, Qiuyue pouted. All right, then let's go to the South City. I've heard that the water and soil there are nourishing, living there for a while would be good. Really? But miss, are you sure the master and madam won't come to catch us? And what about the 9th prince? He seems to have an interest in us, Qiuyue, although happy, still worried. My parents would rather I just disappear and stop bringing shame to the Wei family. As for that lunatic, he's probably too busy to bother with us now. Since Su Haoxian wants a fight to the end, I'll find someone else to challenge him. Among the failed contenders for the throne in my previous life, the second prince, Su Heng, was the strongest. I wrote a letter recounting my past life and had Qiuyue find a way to deliver it to Su Heng. Anyone who hasn't been reborn would think the so-called future is absurd, but they wouldn't ignore it. After all, Su Haoxian will soon make his mark in the military. In our past lives, Su Heng often sabotaged him, and Su Haoxian and I managed to avert the crises together. This time, Su Haoxian must be prepared, but if Su Heng also becomes wary, even if Su Haoxian succeeds, it will cost him dearly. Most importantly, Su Heng will closely monitor Su Haoxian's every move, forcing Su Haoxian to be cautious at every step and unable to pursue me. Thus, the mountains and rivers will separate us, allowing me to be free. The day we left with the merchant caravan, the sun shone brightly on Qiuyue and me, making it hard to keep our eyes open. Qiuyue asked me what I wanted to do once we reached the South City, and I said I hadn't decided yet. In my previous life, I lived for the Wei family, for Su Haoxian, worrying for the Wei family, and fighting for power with Su Haoxian. My only personal desire was merely to preserve myself. Now that I've gained freedom, I'm momentarily lost on what to do. It's okay not to know, the future is long, and there's no lack of things to do. At least, that's how Qiuyue consoled me. Later, we opened a fabric shop in the South City, and business was good. Eventually, Qiuyue got married, and we hired more seamstresses as the shop became busier. I still sat outside, watching passing people, greeting customers here and there, and occasionally doing the accounting. Recently, a strange matter occurred. A young man often came to buy fabric, saying it was for making clothes for his sister. Buying fabric isn't unusual, but what's strange is that he came every day. The seamstresses often marveled that the young man's sister must be a cherished treasure at home, needing new clothes each day. Until one day, he picked a fabric he had bought 2 months ago. I stopped him from buying it. You bought this fabric 2 months ago, sir. He looked flustered and pointed to another fabric. That one you bought a month ago too. And that one you bought yesterday, exactly the same. Sir, you come here every day, but why? I sighed, thinking even a wealthy family wouldn't waste money like this. For you. His voice was soft but clear. Before I could respond, he grabbed the fabric from my hand, left his purse, and dashed away. In his retreating figure, his reddened ears were very noticeable. In the simple days, having such incidents occasionally could be interesting. When Su Haoxian returned to the capital after surviving countless close encounters with death, 3 months had already passed compared to the previous timeline. This time, his second brother was well prepared, causing him repeated setbacks. He couldn't help but wonder if Wei Qianyu was behind this, but he couldn't and wouldn't believe it. She had clearly said she was willing to give him a chance. It wasn't until he went up the mountain and saw the long-abandoned courtyard, devoid of any sign of life, that he felt the emptiness. He wanted to send someone to search for her, but he was under his second brother's constant watch in the capital. If his second brother found out about his painstaking efforts to look for a woman with a tainted reputation, it would surely escalate the matter. Su Haoxian felt helpless and could only take the same path as in his previous life. But this time, he walked it alone. After removing all obstacles, Su Haoxian disregarded the minister's persistent pleas for him to choose an empress. His only desire was to find her. He used every bit of his power to find her. But he forgot that this was already different from what he had promised. He knew she wouldn't come back, but he still held on to his fantasies. He fantasized that she might be having a hard time outside, regretting leaving him. The secret agents brought back news that Wei Qianyu had opened a cloth shop in the South City and had even married. He didn't believe it, thinking it was just a ruse she created to break free from him. Su Haoxian dropped everything in the capital and rushed to the South City, finally stopping in front of the cloth shop. Wei Qianyu was bent over an abacus, calculating, while the man beside her kept the accounts. His pen moved across the paper, but his gaze was fixed on her. Once, under the eaves of the prince's mansion, she would grind ink for him while he handled official business with his head down. But back then, Su Haoxian never looked up at her. The cool wind dried his tears, only to be washed away by new tears. Su Haoxian lost track of how long he stood outside. He only remembered that Wei Qianyu looked tired from her calculations, and the man next to her was massaging her shoulders. That man also saw Su Haoxian and pointed him out to Wei Qianyu. Su Haoxian couldn't hear them but could vaguely make out their lip movements. "My dear, that man looks so strange, he's watching you and crying. Maybe he lost something important and is crying out of urgency." Her eyes were only for that man, she didn't even glance at Su Haoxian. What she always wanted was an equal love. But he realized it too late. This was probably the last time he would come to the South City.